Good morning, everyone. I'm Landon Zimmer. I represent Division 3, North Carolina Board of Transportation. I want to thank you all for attending this session, which is focused on how our ports add value to North Carolina and the national supply chain. And as someone who lives in Wilmington, I can tell you how important that is and the direct economic impact that our ports have to the state. The state's North Carolina Port Authority's competitive rates, combined with no port congestion and no rail dwell, makes it the fastest ship-to-rail service on the East Coast. And with what we've seen the last couple of years with COVID and rising rates, supply chain issues, we realize how important that is. For this session, please hold your questions until the end of the question and answer session at the end. And for those of you logging professional development hours, we will be sending out a self-report form for your PDHs. So everyone who checked in, wait for that. And I guess this won't be the ethics one, but let's go ahead and get started here. I'd like to first introduce our panel moderator. Brian Clark serves as Executive Director of the North Carolina State Ports Authority. And living in Wilmington, I can tell you what a great job he's done there in his brief tenure. He's probably sick of me saying this, but very well respected by the public and private sector. And you all know how hard that is to please both parties, but he does that very well. And if you have any questions about that, look no further than the record-breaking years the ports have had with Brian at the helm. So, Brian Clark. Thank you.
Good morning, and again, welcome to the session on how ports add value to North Carolina and the national supply chain. As Landon mentioned, my name is Brian Clark. I'm the Executive Director. I've had the opportunity to serve for the last 2 years, and prior to that, for about 3.5 years as the Chief Operating Officer. The mission of North Carolina ports is simple. It's to support the economy of the state and open up global gateways for importers and exporters. On an annual basis, over 88,000 jobs and more than $16 billion in economic contribution is generated from the cargoes moving through the ports of Wilmington and Morehead City, our two deep water ports. Over the last 6 years, and with the support of the state and the General Assembly, we've embarked on a $350 million capital expansion campaign that allows us to compete on the global stage. I'd like to recognize a few of our board members that are joining us here today. We have Chairman Bob Wicker, Jerry Cook, Michael Johnson, Emily Parks, and of course Secretary Boyette and Daniel Johnson are here as well. I'd also like to recognize Hans Bean, our Chief Commercial Officer, who's been attending the last few days as well. So the last 2 years have introduced many challenges to the global supply chains. Capacity constraints, equipment shortages, labor issues, demand spikes, and rates, whether they're at extreme highs or extreme lows. For the first time in a long time, port performance and supply chain resiliency have been a daily discussion item for the general public. We're joined today by 4 panelists that represent many aspects of the global supply chain, from carriers to cargo interest, manufacturers and processors, and logistics. They are each great supporters of the North Carolina ports, but they're not exclusive. Therefore, their global and national perspective can help guide North Carolina in the future, and I'm very thankful for each of them to be here today. And as Landon mentioned, with other breakout sessions, each panelist will present for about 10 minutes. We'll hold audience questions till the end, and hope that you'll be interactive with each of our panelists. Their full bios are in the guide. And I will go ahead and start brief introductions and then ask each of them to come up. We're joined by Tiffany Bowman, the CEO of Blue Water Logistics, Corey Barnhill, the President and CEO of Cardinal Foods, Michael Mann, who's the Senior Vice President of Commercial for Independent Container Lines, and then Matthew Drown, Global Manager of Transportation and Packaging for Caterpillar. So first, join me in welcoming Ms. Bowman to the podium. Ms. Bowman is the Chief Executive Officer and the founding member of Blue Water Logistics Group, and in her role, she leads strategic operations and compliance initiatives with a core focus on developing customer supply chain solutions. So Tiffany, thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks to everybody for being here today and the North Carolina ports for your support and the willingness to have us advocate for you. Let me get our slides. It looks like the PowerPoint slide is gone. Okay. All right, so as Brian mentioned, I'm the CEO of Blue Water Logistics Group, and then we have a sister company, Gulfstream Shippers Association. Gulfstream's our international division. Blue Water is our what we would consider our domestic division. Based out of Western North Carolina, we really got our roots started in the home furnishings industry, which continues to be an important industry for all of us here, and have really started pushing, expanding into the building materials and then outdoor sporting goods and manufacturing industries. With both of the companies, jointly we power together to optimize those delivery solutions for our customers. As you know, everything has to be tailor-made to the customer's needs nowadays. You cannot pigeonhole anyone for their supply chain solutions. We pride ourselves in the unique ability to build out those specialized solutions. As far as our business and supply chain requirements, not just within our company, but as a supply chain group and logistics group, we really are going to be dependent, it's been in conversations on the skilled labor and trade labor as we continue to grow as an economy. We need to reinforce the importance of these types of roles, and conversations need to be had, not at the collegiate level. It's got to start, I think, in the middle school, high school levels, sponsoring those DECA clubs, VICA clubs, Skills USA clubs, and apprenticeships, because we need drivers, we need folks working in the warehouses, we need folks working on the ships, we need folks working on the manufacturing side of things. So it's important to continue to have those conversations. We've got to quantify the effects of public investment in our infrastructure to continue to reach parts of the state in a timely manner and to make economic development possible for even the most remote regions, which we see continuing to grow. Housing affordability, of course, continues to be a growing factor as families move outside of the cities and into the suburbs and rural communities. And with that comes additional demand for goods and services in those communities. And of course, everything has to move. I know everybody here likes to eat a good meal, and everything from farm to table or manufacturing table, the shirt off your back. It's important to continue to be able to serve those regions and grow those economies locally. The accessibility in a timely manner is critical to run efficient operations. So this means better interstate and intrastate systems, the rail companies that are going to continue to have to work together in a cohesive manner. And by the way, the North Carolina ports have done a wonderful job at this, as Brian mentioned about the dwell times. More truck power and equipment to support the ships that are coming in and provide efficient and cost-effective solutions for the customers are important. And if you think about those key industries that the state serves, furniture, for example, versus the tech products, shipping cost on tech products continue to be negligible, but furniture, textiles, what have you, those box values aren't as high, so it impacts those industries greater. So we've got to be able to provide those cost-effective solutions to support our pillar industries here in the state and, of course, globally as well. As far as the customer industries served and the innovative solutions that we offer, we have 9 warehouses outside of North Carolina, 4 in North Carolina, and we just opened our first warehouse in Bien Long, Vietnam. So we have specialized equipment, lift on, lift off, flat racks, oversized, and then transloading operations at all major U.S. ports and inland ports. Each shipment is carefully monitored by our staff to ensure expectations are met with clear and concise communication until the cargo has arrived and project requirements have been fulfilled. So how do the ports add value to the national supply chain and to North Carolina? I've put a pictorial up here. It may be hard to see, but I know the presentation will be made available at the end. But this helps paint a picture, if you will. So it's a long-term win for all, and that's all here in the U.S. and then, of course, here in North Carolina. So some statistics from the American Association of Ports is nearly 31 million U.S. jobs are generated by port activity. That's substantial. Without the proper investment, several $1 trillion in reduction will occur by 2030. So they're looking at, roughly 4.5 million in reduction if we do not continue to support the port systems. In 2022 alone, nearly $1 trillion of total economic value was generated, and trade volume is expected to grow by 300% by year 2030, which will drive the numbers I just mentioned even higher. Ports both inland and sea are critical to handle imports and exports, totaling 6.1 billion of goods each day in the top 15 U.S. ports. At the end of the day, If we build the right partnerships as a business, an agency, a government, work together, we've got to be an advocate for one another to continue to solidify North Carolina as a top 20 port and as a key player to the state and the federal economy. So with that said, it's important for us to continue to grow together. And I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Corey.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next up, we have Corey Barnhill, as I mentioned, President and CEO of Cardinal Foods. Corey has played a key role in founding Cardinal Foods and serves as the Chief Executive Officer. In previous roles, he worked for Morgan Stanley in New York and started in the agricultural industry with Harris Crane, Inc. So, Corey, thank you again for being here.
As I was sitting there, I was thinking I'm way out in front of my skis on being here today, and I appreciate Brian inviting me. I told my wife this morning what I was doing, and she said, "What in the world are they having you for?" So, but no, so just to tell you a little bit about, I mean, obviously with, these participants here, Cardinal Foods is a very small business. It was essentially a distressed asset in 2017 that we acquired from a co-op. Restructured that business. It was a seasonal blueberry processor in eastern North Carolina that processed frozen blueberries distributed mostly to industrial manufacturers in the U.S. When we started that business, we went on the premise of growing it to a year-round production and adding sweet potatoes, mostly frozen products. And as you know, 60% of the U.S. Production of sweet potatoes is here in North Carolina. Roughly about 80% of that export volume that goes through a lot of the port of Wilmington comes out of North Carolina as well. So the idea was, hey, we're going to process sweet potatoes here in eastern North Carolina and run this plant. What we found was, limited amount of CapEx in the front end. We were just servicing industrial users, so people like Sara Lee, pie manufacturers across the globe, very limited volume. During COVID, we saw an opportunity where a plant actually had gone out of business in Canada. We relocated those assets to Burgaw, North Carolina, and in process of restructuring and doing a sweet potato fry line of significant magnitude there at that same facility and growing exponentially to service both the European market and then domestically. So, what we through that, we added a vertical integration piece within the last 12 months where we've taken over an ownership stake in a company called Ham Farms, which is a North Carolina business that is located in East North Carolina that is the largest producer of sweet potatoes in North America. What we do at that particular location is we're actually growing and managing roughly about 31,000 acres of farmland. We produce sweet potatoes. We do obviously fresh sweet potatoes, and then we also do baby food products, purees for industrial, and then also dehydrated that goes into flours and pet foods. And then obviously with the expansion there in Burgaw, the frozen food piece. Our main thing in that industry is overall is quality. Is what we've seen, and then if you really think about the sweet potato has been around for a long time, but the sweet potato fry and really these niche products has really kind of started in like 2007, 2008, and this huge driver is obviously export, both on the further process side and then also the fresh products. So I'm a big believer in, grew up in Burgaw, right where the plant's located at, so big advocate for North Carolina. And I would say that, I've had, Fortune 500 companies come here, to look to build sites and to work with. And I mean, what Hans and Brian have done with the port system is just, unbelievable. And, some of these companies have been here, 15, 20 years ago, and the improvements that have been made to the port and the investment that the state has done, is just a huge part for North Carolina and specifically in, the Wilmington region, and, magnitudes, and I think the growth potential that we have for that long term is going to be great. Roughly for on our fresh side of our business is very, very limited when it comes to export. That historically was a little bit different. That market's, due to COVID and some tariffs based on the Trump administration, we've lost some market share in Europe. We hope to regain that. That was a pretty big part, in partnership with Michael in the past, on, going into Europe. And so we're planning to grow that business. Roughly about 40% of our production from Breakout will actually be exported into Europe. One of our largest customers is there and is in the white potato fry business. The main premise, and if you don't know kind of the whole sweet potato industry, most of these potatoes that go into further processing are left North Carolina and go as far as Idaho, Canada, and then even exported into Europe and then be further processed. So what we said is, hey, take these customers and build relationships in a win-win environment, bring that production to North Carolina and produce a finished good and save on that transportation cost. And so the partnership with the port, ICL, and all the other carriers, is very strategic into making this whole supply chain work. Not only are we exporting our goods, we're a very large importer of urea and potash, liquid nitrogen, for the farming operations. So we're bringing, pulling parts of the ships that go from Russia into the United States, and mostly that comes into Wilmington and Norfolk. So you kind of look at that overall thing that we have, and even though we're a small part of it, both on the inbound side, that's been very strategic for us to be competitive in this environment, especially with what energy prices are done on the liquid nitrogen side of things. And for us and where we're located into the port and being able to get in and out, and the I-40 system to cover the farms, it's extremely convenient, and a benefit to our overall business. Talked about, just our business segment. I think I've already kind of hit on this, is the, what we want to do. And, by joining these forces in the consolidation of the vertical integration piece of our overall business, is being able to be what I always joke around with my team about, is being the one-stop potato shop. We want to be, if you're in the sweet potato, you need a product, we want to be able to serve you. And whether that's a puree or a further processed item like a fry or a fresh potato that's you're eating at the Texas Roadhouse or Ruth Chris, we want to be your preferred partner, and that's what we're building, and over the last few years here to be more competitive. It is a commodity, and we feel like that, with all these asset bases that we've been able to build up, that we've built a competitive business to be able to handle all those service areas. I think, and I don't want to step on any toes here, but one of the questions was, how do ports add value to North Carolina and the national supply chain? I think that North Carolina has got to realize what got us here, is that the Port of Wilmington is a small port that services customers and has extreme service. We can invest, and I look at my business as Cardinal Foods, is I'm expanding that facility and I'm increasing production by 500% and 600%. But what we have to realize, and I think that the state needs to realize, is we can put money towards that project, but we've got to understand what got us here. And what got us here is service. And we don't need to get over our production of what's happening there, and we need to make sure that we continue to service the clients that are here, whether it's Caterpillar, ourselves, and all of those, because that's the key that's going to make this thing successful, and that's what's going to attract business. And so moderate growth and being able to continue to do what the port has been built on is critical, and being able to maintain that service perspective. There's nobody that can beat it right now when it comes to service. But, we don't want to get too far out. And as I would always say on the production side of our business is, we don't want to overcommit, and we don't want to get to a point where we're producing or we're trying to outgrow what our infrastructure can handle. And I think, one of the things that, working with DOT is, and that we're seeing in other states, and, I briefly mentioned the Fortune 500 company that we had here. They were a huge part, and, they moved to Georgia and built a very large complex there. And one of the biggest things is the inner workings with the Department of Commerce, and, and the incentives that were to be able to get them here. And it also went right straight down to weight restrictions and being able to have, competitiveness when it comes to pulling heavy loads outside the ports and into a short diagram of area or geographic area. So I think all those things are really critical of, part of being successful, and for us, for private enterprise, and then also the state to be able to work together on. I'm a North Carolinian, and I want a win-win, and I'm a firm believer of a high tide rises all boats. But, you know, I think those were just a couple of things when it came to mind of, you know, how we can think is we need to make sure that, well, what got us here and what's making us successful is that's what we continue to operate. So, once again, you know, I just appreciate, you know, the time, and if there's any questions, I guess we'll take them there at the end.
Thank you, Corey. Next one, introduce Mr. Michael Mann, Senior Vice President, Commercial with Independent Container Lines. Michael has served with ICL's executive team for over 9 years. Prior to that, Michael held several positions with the AP Moeller-Maersk Group, most recently as Director of East Region Sales with Maersk Line. So, Michael, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd first like to just thank Brian and Hans and the leadership team at NC Ports for having me here along with the board of the Ports Authority and the North Carolina Department of Transportation for putting on this venue. I know it's in the early few years of this. It's quite important. I've been to a lot of these type events, so it's very good to have a focus on North Carolina and the port systems down in Wilmington and Moorhead. First, I'd like to say the answer to the theme of today about the importance of North Carolina Ports Authority to the North Carolina global supply chain as well as the national supply chain. Very important, and in my opinion, it's the #1 economic development driver for the state, and all sorts of trickle-down economy that come through the port. Very important. I'm not sure that it has always been given the type of investment, and I'm talking, I've been in this industry. I decided a couple years ago to stop at 25 years, just over 25 years, but I've been doing this for a long time, as Hans and Brian have, and understand the importance of the ports. And there's a lot of competition with the ports, but there's a lot of business to go around. So I'm glad the last several years the state has really put a focus on the port systems. As far as the national supply chain, I can tell you that the efficiency at which the port runs is unparalleled on the East Coast. And I, myself, that's quite important to myself, an independent container line, as an ocean container carrier operator there. Our most critical part of our weekly service we provide is when we're in the ports. And they routinely work us quite efficient when we're there. I'll throw some stats out that you can do a little research. We routinely do 40 moves an hour while we're alongside the terminal, which is unprecedented. The last 2.5 years have been a wild ride. I'll tell you that in our end of the ocean, it's quite wild every year. It's something different, but no congestion for us. We have gotten through the ports very quickly, which has been critical in the supply chain, especially with all the customers we move. 2 of them sitting on the board here with us. It's quite important getting all sorts of commodities, parts, chemicals, sweet potatoes in and out of this state. So I applaud them for that. Independent Container Line, we are a transatlantic ocean container carrier. Our industry likes to acronym everything. I'm going to try not to use any of those today to shorten everything. We have been around this will be our 38th year. We have been in the transatlantic trade the entire time. So we have not ventured into the Pacific or any of the north-south trades. We think our model runs well in this trade lane and really only this trade lane. It makes sense to us. So we are the asset owner. We're in an intensive asset side of the business. We own ships, we own containers, we own warehouses. We purchase a lot of fuel every week. And right now in the winter, we burn a lot of fuel when we're trying to get across the transatlantic. Being able to get in and out of the port efficiently helps us stay on schedule. At the bottom, you'll see about 8 or 9 years ago, we decided to put our branding in a little more order. These are our 3 pillars that really encompass everything about independent container line. There are a lot of ocean carriers out there. We are one of the smaller ones. I spent a long time working with the largest one before. They all have their different approaches to things. We have a quite different approach to how we do business, how we look at business, how we run our business. These three pillars help do that. The first thing is reliability. That seems kind of simple. It's not. It's a very hard thing to achieve. It's very sacred in the ICL world. We simply want to show up on time every week, and that's not easy to do. I'm not telling you that it doesn't go without a lot of work, especially this time of year, but that's a model that we're kind of the only one running that model in any trade right now. So the other things at the bottom, we talk about our customer service. We're willing to flex and bend and provide a high level of customer service. Tiffany touched on that in her presentation. That fits well with North Carolina Ports. We have a lot of tenure at our company. We have employees that have been there the whole 38 years. So we have a lot of knowledge. And then finally, we have always been more of, one of our owners termed it up, we've been more of a logistics company that happens to own 4 ships and a lot of containers. And so we do a lot of customized logistics solutions that we'll partner with a customer. We run a lot of unique programs. We do a lot of unique things with Caterpillar on that basis, that we're not afraid to go into a specialized solution for them. So that kind of encompasses our model that we've been running. This is quite simply our map for our weekly service where we run in the North Atlantic. Our scope is the continent, the northern part of the continent, as well as the UK and Ireland. And we come into the northeast, into Chester, which is Philadelphia, and then down into Wilmington. We are there almost every Friday on time, like clockwork. If you want to come down to the port, we'll be there, our ship working and hopefully on its way. These are our transit times, which only mean something if you actually show up on those dates and run that transit time. It's quite important to my customers when I can tell them that their parts are going to be there on time and they're running a pretty lean supply chain. So it's quite important and sacred to not only my customers, to us. But this is our scope. Our European headquarters is in Antwerp. We have offices in the UK, in Liverpool, as well as up in Chester. We also run 4 warehouses, I'll get into later, and partner with multiple more warehouses in all locations. We're also really the only, we're the only deep sea service, one of 2 into Cork, but the only one in the transatlantic as well, into Ireland. So moving along, these are just an aerial view of the 5 ports we call with our 4 ships, which is not easy to do, but given the proximity of where Cork is to Southampton, we can pull this off. I think Wilmington, I can't really see down in the bottom left there. So just an overview of our footprint from the port side. And these are our 4 ships. We run 4 ships that are classified as 3100T vessels. They are all built around the 2005-06. They're all sister ships that came out of the yard in the same yard at the same time. So we know them well. We know how to operate them well, and quite familiar with them. These are the speeds. We don't like to get up there to that speed too often because much like driving your car, if you drive that fast, you're going to spend that much more money on fuel. What's interesting at 3100 Ts, there are certainly larger ships in the transatlantic, absolutely, but we are 100% independent container line on our ship. We don't sell space. We don't slot charter out. This is all our cargo moving week to week. Moving along, I think this last one, I had a couple more there, slides, but this is where our office is. I'll say for us, one of the things I had meant to put in here, there's a third-party group called Intel that measures the performance of all the ocean carriers in the world. We are very proud of that, a subscription-based service that they monitor all of our performances in and out. For us, we routinely show up at 100%. And we are very happy that they're out doing this type of service in all the different trade lanes for customers. So when somebody wants to model their supply chain on a certain carrier and they're taking a bid, they can really find out when they post these transit times, are they living up to it? Our competition, quite frankly, runs a different model, but their on-time reliability is quite different than ours. And lastly, from the, I'll say from the supply chain side, I mentioned earlier, we run warehouses up in Chester, down in Wilmington. Our main CFS location is Cape Fear Bonded Warehouse. We also partner with a couple others at Chestnut and SNR, just frankly from the volume we're moving in and out. We do quite a robust refrigerated service, especially we're moving a lot of sweet potatoes, as we've said here, and that Corey mentioned. Right now we are just starting into the season, so for about the next 6-7 months there's going to be a lot of sweet potatoes moving out. Don't worry, there's going to be plenty here in the States, and Corey promises me I won't ever run out at the store myself. So that's it from our perspective. Just want to give a few slides on the overview of Independent Container Line. And our headquarters, I'm up in the Richmond area, so just a couple hours up 85. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Michael. And our final presentation it will be given by Matthew Drown. He's the Global Manager of Transportation and Packaging for Caterpillar. Mr. Drown's been with Caterpillar for about 11 years now. In addition to his current role, he's also the Global Chair for the Caterpillar Activate Employee Resource Group, and is a member of the ECU Board of Advisors for Marketing. So, Matthew, thank you for joining us.
A little tricky there on the edge of the stage. Want to make sure I didn't go too quick. So thank you, Brian, for having me today. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the North Carolina Port. I want to talk today a little bit about Caterpillar. I think everybody's probably heard of Caterpillar, hopefully, and want to share a little information on how what we do, how we move parts and finished goods all over the world is heavily reliant on the global infrastructure that we have, including the North Carolina ports. So just start off with kind of, for those that may not be as familiar, I think some of these industries we serve may be familiar to many of you, some not so much. I think everybody's well aware that Caterpillar manufactures construction equipment. That's pretty common knowledge. Some of you may know about mining equipment. I suspect a few may even know we get into off-highway diesel, natural gas engines, and even industrial gas turbines. Just out of curiosity, how many of you realize that we make diesel-electric locomotives? So more than I thought. So a lot of people don't realize that, but that is actually part of our business, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a moment and how it ties into North Carolina as well. So at Caterpillar, you know, our motto we go by is we help our customers build a better, more sustainable world. And the last statement there I want to touch on a little bit more, but that's something that we've added fairly recently with the importance of sustainability. Just go ahead and move to the next slide and kind of touch on that a bit more. So in recent years, we've started publishing an annual sustainability report in addition to our annual report to focus and heavily emphasize in this area. And what my group does, my team does, in partnership with, you know, companies like ICL, the ports, is to try and capitalize on opportunities to maximize our efficiencies by utilizing, you know, what the ports have to offer, the regulations and whatnot that I think have already kind of been mentioned. It's critically important for us to also, you know, not only cut costs, but just as importantly, to have a positive impact on sustainability in the environment. So it's something we measure. We, you know, literally every time we make a change, anytime we look at new opportunities, we're cognizant of the impact on the environment, and that's something that we want to make sure we continue to do. A lot of the time people think of Caterpillar as being very North American centric, and although we have a lot of equipment in the US, a lot of equipment in Canada and Mexico, 2021, 62% of our sales and revenue were outside of the United States. So I think that that just goes to show how global we are in terms of our footprint and in terms of our sales, and why it's so important for us to have the support, the infrastructure, the resources to be able to move goods and parts throughout the world. Touched on a minute ago, but we have, with all the industries we serve, over 4 million Caterpillar assets at work around the world. And, you know, it wouldn't be possible without our dealer network. We have 160 dealers, independent dealers, in 193 countries throughout the world. So large footprint that gets our equipment to the end user, to the end customer, and very important partnership and part of what we do. And that's how we connect to the end user, not only through the actual machine, but all the way through the end of the life of the machine as well. And that's important with parts and service and everything else that they do to make Caterpillar viable. Just as important, we have roughly 27,000 suppliers globally. So large footprint of parts moving to manufacturing facilities, moving to our dealers, and also to our customers. If a machine breaks down in the field anywhere in the world, we've got to get parts to them. So we need to have those parts available. We have a footprint that allows us to do that, but it's critically important that we have the right suppliers, and that requires, because of our manufacturing footprint, which I'll get into in a minute, that requires a global network and the ability to move parts all over the world. So let's talk about North Carolina for a minute. So there are 6 Caterpillar facilities throughout the state. Start off with Winston-Salem. That is actually Progress Rail, the diesel locomotive facility there in Winston-Salem. In addition to that, we have a heavy basis with building construction products, which I'm part of that division in central North Carolina here, Cary being our division headquarters. We have manufacturing facilities in Sanford and Clayton, and then a warehouse that supports both in Smithfield. And then there is a hose facility, manufactures hoses, so a supplier to not only Caterpillar but other customers based in Goldsboro, North Carolina. There are over 2,700 employees, Caterpillar employees in North Carolina, so pretty large presence, and over 770 suppliers. So with all this, in addition to our 2 dealers, you see there, Gregory Pool and Carolina Cat, we have to move a lot of raw material as well as finished goods both into and out of North Carolina, not just within North America, but globally. So again, the importance of having viable options, a global infrastructure that supports that. I can't state that enough, how critical that is to our supply chains and to everything that we do. Kind of break it down for you a bit. When I say we're a global company, this is actually specific to the division I'm part of, Building Construction Products. And you can see our footprint. We're on 4 continents, North America, South America, Asia, and Europe. And you can see our manufacturing facilities and some of the machines that we manufacture. So in Pennsylvania, we manufacture our telehandler machines, a couple locations there. North Carolina, we manufacture both our skid steer as well as our small wheel loaders. In Waco, Texas, as well as Clayton, we actually have facilities that bring in machines from Europe and distribute those throughout North America. Athens, Georgia, we produce our mini hydraulic excavators and our track-type tractors. Some of you know those as dozers. And then in Torreon, Mexico, we have a fabrications facility. In South America, we produce backhoes, small wheel loaders, and now skid steers. In Europe, we produce backhoes and compact wheel loaders. India, we have a parts facility in Hosur, and then we have 2 manufacturing facilities there that produce backhoes and skid steer loaders as well as small wheel loaders. China produce mini hydraulic excavators, and then in Japan, mini hydraulic excavators and compact wheel loaders. And I want to take a moment to highlight all of the different types of equipment because, as you can imagine, I'll kind of move to the next slide and talk about this. As you can imagine, with such a broad spectrum, even though we are just one division of Caterpillar, we have a large representation of different size equipment, 9 product families, 80 models. The thing that's unique, and first I'll just kind of share with you, when everybody talks about building construction products, especially our big brothers in mining and other parts of the business, they refer to us as producing the little stuff. And for those that have seen our small wheel loaders, our track-type tractors, they're not so little, but when you compare them to some of the other mining equipment, it's relative. It definitely is. But, at the end of the day, it's critically important for us. We have the ability, we have the luxury, I guess you would say. Most of our equipment can move multiple modes of transportation. We can put a lot of our machines in containers. We can move them on flat racks. We can move them, roll on, roll off. So having the global infrastructure and the ports that support various types of movement of parts as well as finished machines, which is at the end of the day is how we get to our customers, is very important to us. And having those capabilities, whether it be in North Carolina or elsewhere, that's how we get our parts to market, our machines to market. So it's critically important that we have the right support and we have the right infrastructure for us to be able to do what we do. So appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I'll turn it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Matthew. Again, thank you to all 4 for your presentations. Appreciate you taking the time and sharing your information with us and the audience. I do want to open it up to audience questions now. And then we also have some questions that, based on feedback from the audience. So I'll open the floor. We have a question over there. I think we have microphones. Use this here. Okay, great.
No, it's not. I think probably any industry right now, I mean, over the last 24 months, I mean, is the labor issue. I mean, so we're in a little bit different where we use the federal program, the H-2A program for harvest, which is roughly about 750 individuals. But, you know, that's by far the biggest challenge that we have in agriculture.
I have a few questions. Hopefully will spark some interest. Tiffany, what additional capabilities have North Carolina ports done in support of suburban and rural markets in North Carolina?
Sure, I can certainly speak to this. Being in Western North Carolina and seeing the expansion in population growth there, we've really had a boom. But adding the Queen City Express, I'd say relatively not too long ago, has been a huge benefit to us. Being able to turn our product, being able to bring in additional manufacturing facilities to the western part of the state, be able to service that Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia borders as well, and those chemical industries, pharmaceutical industries, and again the continued manufacturing industries as well. So the North Carolina ports have done a phenomenal job at supporting us. Certainly there has been a big asset to us.
Excellent, thank you. And just as a little background, I didn't mention in my intro, the Queen City Express is our intermodal container rail service from Wilmington to Charlotte. It started in 2017. And actually ICL has been one of our largest supporters of that. And Michael, I'd ask, you know, what could we change? What could the state do to make that a better experience for you?
No, I appreciate that, Brian. Yeah, we have been a supporter since day one. We roughly bring in 120 boxes from Wilmington to Charlotte each week, and we take back, those are laden, loaded boxes. We take back about 85, 90 laden, loaded, and another 30 odd empty. So we're a big supporter and big believer, and love the fact that it's taking trucks off the road. And when it runs, you know, the frequency and on-time reliability. When, you know, at ICL we look at things when they're out of our control. That means we may not make it to the ship on time, but it's been running very well on its reliability. The one thing I would say, there is my opinion, there is an inefficient part of this efficient solution, and it has to do where the Charlotte Inland Port is located. Brian and I've talked about this in Hans. The CSX ramp and the inland port are about 1.5 miles away from each other. So that means that every one of those containers have to be trucked over back and forth. So there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of cost involved in that. You know, truckers aren't going to run 1.5 miles. You're going to spend a couple hundred dollars or more running that. So in my opinion, that's the only part. It takes all these trucks off the road, takes them off 74, but the proximity being 1.5 miles apart and going across town in Charlotte, which is not the easiest place to go, even 1 mile in sometimes, would be something that can make it even more efficient.
Excellent, appreciate that. Give a minute to see if there's any audience questions on the back. So the panel here, and they can answer, I think Corey might get some product imported through Moorhead, but the panel is pretty much exclusively focused on Wilmington here and on the containerized trade. The difference between Wilmington and Moorhead City is it's a smaller facility, about 130 acres, but it's only handling bulk and break bulk cargo. In Wilmington, we have just under 300 acres, about 100 of that dedicated to container operations, the balance to general cargo. A lot of complementary work between the two. There are services that will call both ports based on available capacity, but most of the focus today is really on the containerized trade. So thank you for that. Matthew, you had mentioned obviously significant amount of Caterpillar volume moving globally, both import and export. What additional improvements would help benefit you moving through North Carolina or ports in general, these U.S. ports in general?
Yes, so thank you, Brian. I think that, Corey made a very good point when we talk about the size of the Port of Wilmington and we talk about the intimacy and the customer service on the level. That's something that, regardless of what changes, that needs to be maintained. That's something that's critical. That being said, I think that there are, with having a port that is, very reliable, very limited on congestion and everything, all those benefits. The flip side is we don't necessarily have all the options that we could use. There's very limited roll-on, roll-off options. There are some, but very limited. Don't go to all regions of the world. The carriers that call on Wilmington, I know there are things underway to deepen and widen, but not necessarily as much there. So those kind of things could definitely continue to benefit us, and having more even on-site warehouse opportunities that the port manages could be another benefit for us to
Be able to grab the mic. Sorry about that.
Sorry, that better? Having even more, things like on-site presence in terms of warehousing options, things like that, without having to go off-port to integrate that would also be beneficial.
Excellent, thank you.
As we've seen a post-COVID sort of shift in manufacturing away from just in time, how are you seeing the way that you work with the port shift in your business model? And that could be whether it's Cardinal, Caterpillar,
Well-
Water.
We'll start off with Matthew. Maybe we'll have a couple people answer that question. Great one, thank you.
Yes, so really I think that the biggest thing, not so much how we work with the port per se, but just supply chain in general, is trying to have improved service, reduced impact. By the time we have material available, and in a lot of cases it becomes just in time because of supplier capacity and whatnot, we need it here. We can't afford those unnecessary delays. So having reliability at a port like Wilmington is extremely beneficial versus other ports I won't mention that maybe you don't have that reliability. So that is definitely something that we have seen, where we have the opportunity to utilize the more reliable option we have where we've been able to. Doesn't always fit because it's, not all services go to all places, but that's something that in particular has changed that before we probably wouldn't have looked at in the same way.
Corey, Tiffany, anything to add?
Yes, so we've seen quite a demand, an uptick for warehousing on our side, and warehousing solutions. So, and that could be mixed and that could be distribution as well. But the growth and the demand, especially from the manufacturing end, to have those parts and components and kits readily available, has become high demand, hard to find, and there's a lot of building of those warehouse footprints going on now on our end, and then of course across the whole industry as it sits. So I think we'll continue to see that because we all had our eyes opened, when we had those stock outs and how that impacted the sales. And I think you can go online to almost any retailer and still see that things may not ship until August. So we're still seeing that backlog there. But I think as we continue to increase the footprint and the service opportunities there, it'll help kind of bring that curve back down to a normal level.
Yeah, I think they kind of hit on it, but the biggest thing is just that service. Whether we're importing items or we're exporting, product to Europe, you can't change but so much. But if and it's like I tell my kids, when you go across the bridge on a Friday, you look to the left and there's a ship there. It's going to be there every Friday, and we can count on that. And so if we take that out of our day-to-day operations and worries, that's a huge part of it.
So today, Charlotte Inland Port is our only inland port facility. Previously, we had property in Greensboro, but it wasn't rail served, and so it was removed from the inventory a couple years ago. We're always looking for opportunities, though. Question in the back. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the full question. It's a great question, and it's actually part of our development plan to increase the overall capacity of the facility. I mentioned at my opening to date about $350 million investment, largely focused on the containerized as part of the operation. And that investment is geared on basically doubling the overall capacity of the port facility itself. The one piece that's of critical importance is the deepening of the channel. It is a project that is moving through the federal process. It is supported also by the state. There's full funding in place for the non-federal share of that project. But that will allow us, the Port of Wilmington, specifically in the container operation, to remain competitive with our East Coast peers. So great question. And our goal is obviously to continue to grow the volume, but never lose that customer service feel that we've talked about a couple of times here. So.
I would just jump in there. So it's quite important. North Carolina has done an outstanding job bringing in, landing a lot of global companies. And as Matthew pointed out, it's not just having CAT here. They have 770 suppliers here, and that's where the trickle down just continues to grow and grow. Recent announcement of Toyota is fantastic, and things like that are going to continue to bring their suppliers. Things we love because that makes it more opportunities for ICL to continue growing in and out of Wilmington.
Good question here.
I come in late and I apologize for that. The deepening, is it a maintenance or is this a actual construction project? I guess I'm kind of trying to see, is this something we've done before and haven't fixed, or are we just making it deeper?
The effort is for us to actually have the Army Corps of Engineers deepen the channel itself to remain more competitive with other East Coast ports that have already completed deepening projects.
This is not like a settlement thing or anything?
Now, they do maintain on, this is a future project, they do maintain on an annual basis to the design depth of the channel today. We're trying to get it to be deeper and then maintained in the future. So thank you for that, though. Any other questions? So Michael, what does normal look like? We're after, beyond this 2-year cycle of the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, and you've spent along your career in the carrier industry.
Yeah, that's a great question. If I truly knew that answer, I'd probably be in another line of work, to be honest with you. Didn't require so much focus. I learned early the ships, as I tell my kids, the ships run 24/7, Christmas, New Year's, every holiday. We've got people out on the sea. You know, there's still a lot of Pacific cargo that keeps getting interrupted by the COVID flux out of China. And a lot of that cargo is still diverted to the East Coast, which is, you know, NC Ports is seeing it, Charleston, Savannah, Norfolk, Newark. The labor situation on the West Coast isn't settled yet. I think a lot of that cargo will be diverted into this year until that is settled. I don't know when that's going to settle. Not a lot of details coming out of the negotiations right now from there. Once it gets settled and gets a long-term contract, some of that cargo will naturally go back to the West Coast and settle out and help some of the congestion that still remains on the East Coast as far as the other guys. As I told you, we haven't experienced that in Wilmington at all. We quite frankly couldn't run our model if we had. As long as we can show up on time, you know, we have our berth, so that helps. I think there's so much unknown about, you know, inflation seems to be ebbing down, not to get on the economist side. We still have some unrest with the energy and the war in Ukraine and Europe, which has a big impact onto what we do. Some of our customers have been very impacted by that and not being able to go into Ukraine. So that's another one. I don't know how long that goes either to settle, but I think that's one of the key things is to try to get the unrest over there settled, and so Europe can get back to growing their economy.
Excellent, thank you. See if there's any audience questions. I have a question for both Matthew and Tiffany. Based on your experience, what are other ports, other states doing differently that perhaps North Carolina and North Carolina ports can adopt or should focus on?
Sure. So I wouldn't necessarily say differently, but just continuing to support the growth of your power units. You know, your truckers, having those yards for the equipment to be accessible in a turn, adding the chassis, adding that specialized equipment, but just having that accessibility at hand, especially with the regulations we have on our truck power right now. It's more important to to continue to drive operations in an efficient manner, and again, that cost-effective manner as well. So if we can get our drivers turned around, get drop yards set up with our customers here, it's going to be an efficient operation for everybody, and you're not going to see the accessorials continue to, add up and mount like you could see at other ports or other West Coast ports. So you guys have done a great job of that, but I think continuing to support as we grow together, as you look to possibly expand the port in the future, will be important.
Excellent, thank you. Matthew, from your view?
Maybe to start with, one thing that I think you guys do differently and better than other states is the fact that in conjunction with the port and what we have opportunity to move across the state, the regulations that allow, and Corey touched on it, moving heavier shipments is huge for your customers. So I think that's one thing in particular that differentiates you guys that other states, any surrounding state, I think, in fact, unless I'm mistaken, in the U.S., I don't think there's another state that has, the ability to do that. A thing, and it was kind of touched on with regard to a question that was asked a little while ago, I think, about the inland port. I think one thing I see in other states, there's a lot of focus on trying to look at additional options for inland ports, not just having one location and a concentrated effort, but trying to distribute that and use that as an extension of the port too, so that now when you talk about growing the port, it doesn't necessarily have to be, for example, in Wilmington, it can be within the state by having maybe something in the western part of the state and even, central eastern part of the state that can extend your reach and expand your capacity. So I think those are some of the things that I would see in particular that some of the other surrounding ports and states in conjunction are doing to continue to increase their viability and to grow, that probably lessons that can be learned.
Excellent, thank you. So Corey, outside of port infrastructure, what do you think DOT needs to focus its efforts?
Nothing really comes to mind. I mean, I think just continuing to, the interstate system. I mean, I think that's just kind of what we're talking about with the inland ports. I mean, I think with CSX, I mean, and what was that with like Rocky Mount and some of those opportunities, just being supportive of that and on the rail side of things. But nothing really comes to mind right off the top.
Excellent. Marco, you mentioned 74 before. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely say continue the improvement. There's been a lot of work done in the last few years. I spent several years living in Charlotte and quite familiar with that area, but getting that to a true expressway, all the inland ports help a lot, but we still manage ourselves between the Chester and Wilmington port, 320 trucks. So trucking, as Tiffany said, is a problem. We've tried to recruit more as a country, but it's hard to get those. So every truck we can take off the road really helps. But 74, could be a lot more efficient as far as the trucking aspect going up. There's still going to be trucks going up from Wilmington to Charlotte. We ourselves we've had to change our model over the year for the trucking aspect. We run a series of hub and spoke systems to expand our reach and really to try to help drivers be home every night. I get it. They want to be home. They want to be in their beds every night. I do too. So that has really helped, but that's had a lot of expense into it. It's eaten up chassis and drivers. We build them off of the Queen City Express, which allows our reach to go further and bring cargo through Wilmington. So everybody wins in those situations.
Excellent. So a couple more minutes for audience questions, if anybody has any.
I've got a question actually. So what's the situation with Michael on the ships? Where are we at on new ships making it online? And
great question. You've seen in some of the publicly traded larger lines, the order books have started filling up, but they've actually started pushing some of those orders in the last 5 or 6 weeks, given some of the slowdown. Those are quite complex contracts with the shipyards. But there is a fair amount on order. There's some of them that have got a large order book. MSC is one that has come out publicly with a very, very large order book. That'll take, takes a couple years to cascade that out, and some of the ships will be retired at that time. Some of them will cascade down into other trade lanes.
So prior to these orders being booked, what was?
Oh, the order book was quite open.
Right.
There was nothing on it.
For
But,
those
you
who didn't hear, just sorry to interrupt, if you
Yeah.
didn't hear the question, it was, what's the order book for new container capacity look like? And most carriers over the last several years, based on financial performance, have started placing very large orders for new build ships, most of which are very large capacity vessels. And that's, just wanted to make sure everybody heard that question.
Yeah, and most of those run in your east-west trades, primarily Asia, Europe, and Asia, the US.
So I think I'll wrap up with a question for each of you, a single question. It's going to be the same. So we've obviously made our ways through the last 2.5 years of the global pandemic. Each has affected your individual businesses differently. How do you feel North Carolina as a whole is positioned for future supply chain disruptions, not just the ports, but the state as a whole? And where should we be placing our efforts? Matthew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, you know, if you look at a lot of the activity, you know, I live in Johnston County, and, you know, we were talking about this a little while ago, it's kind of a crux of a lot of activity in terms of interstates, which is critical for, you know, moving traffic, whether it be commercial or individuals moving on the road. I think the state is, you know, definitely in a good position from a planning perspective. I think that, you know, one of the things that, you know, I would see, and as I mentioned for us, we move materials and product in and out of North Carolina. And a lot of the time we think about intra-North Carolina, more so than, you know, outside of North Carolina. And I think that, you know, it's important to consider overall, and for us it's important, moving parts, material goods, you know, globally, you know, within the U.S. as well. Not just, you know, where we get outside, but if we're bringing things into Wilmington and out of Wilmington, we have facilities all over the world, and Michael's well aware of this, that we bring parts into Wilmington and we send them out of Wilmington. So that those come from all over the, you know, North America. So, you know, just continuing to ensure that is at the forefront. North Carolina, I think, is, I mean, from a planning perspective, there are certain aspects that I think are going well. I think that, you know, there are probably some other things that could be improved upon. We've touched on several of those, and I think just being cognizant, doing exactly this, listening to the customers, listening to the people that are using those services, the businesses, and trying to evolve in the right way and have that future outlook, I think is critical.
Excellent, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of different things. I'd probably say moving forward, another area we haven't really discussed would be on technology, and in the same word, cybersecurity. We're seeing all aspects of the supply chain getting hacked these days, from ports, terminals, ships. So that's important to us. And on the technology side, I know that NC Ports has gone through a big upgrade with their terminal. I almost used an acronym right there. Their terminal operating system instead of TOS with Navis, and that's great. It doesn't come without heartburn on everybody that's going through there for the time. But you know, we're big on that. We have to cut down. There's so much paperwork involved with export declarations and customs that if we can take those manual processes out, it'll allow both of us to move more cargo. So there's a lot going on with technology, and like anything, that, you know, there's not all of it's going to pan out, but you know, we have to keep investing on that end and able to grow the volume that we need to get to. So.
Excellent, thank you. Corey?
Yeah, I think, you know, from our business, I mean, growth is somewhat plateaued from what we've done in the last few years, but, you know, the infrastructure that, one, the port has put in is phenomenal, but also what we're seeing in the private sector when it comes to cold storage and the money that's being spent in that is huge. And I don't think that we're at that capacity. I mean, we've definitely, the projects that are, you know, either breaking ground or in the process is going to be really open some big doors for us in North Carolina, and that's kind of on the food sector. And then you look at what we're doing on the technology side with the state and attracting these clients. And you know, we're in the central part of the East Coast. I mean, it's the place where everyone wants to be. It's geographically great. I mean, it's the convenience factor. I mean, we've got a lot of good things going for us, and between cold storage, warehousing, and the infrastructure that's being put in place, I mean, I think we have some really good future ahead of us.
Excellent, thank you. Tiffany?
Sure, to piggyback on Corey, you know, what we have as a benefit is we've got land to build on, and we're seeing a lot of groundbreaking going on. We've got to continue to work with the EDC chapters, the economic development chapters, the local governments, the agencies to bring these companies in. We've seen quite I wouldn't say a migration, but an expansion from several companies on the West Coast, especially up the I-40 corridor. continuing to build and put in pretty large footprints. So, you know, it's important to work together, city, water, sewer. It takes everybody to bring these guys in to make them feel comfortable and at home here in North Carolina. It's a great place to call home. I think we're all pretty biased about that, but just keeping an open mind and seeing the growth and opportunity and impact, not just now, but the future that these companies will bring will be important, and we are well positioned for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. One last opportunity for audience questions. And if not, I want to thank all 4 panelists. I think it was a great discussion, great concerns raised about future, where our focus needs to be, and I appreciate you taking the opportunity to join us today. With that, I'll pass it to Landon.
Yes, as we wrap up the session, we'd like to thank our partner, NC Go, for hosting the 2023 Transportation Summit. I would also like to thank all our sponsors for helping make this event happen. If you haven't done so already, please visit the exhibition hall downstairs, the exhibit hall. You'll find some technologies, impressive technologies and companies down there. Make sure also to visit NCDOT's Office of Civil Rights Business Development Zone for a great networking opportunity. I want to thank you all again for attending this and staying to the end. And I'll see you all at lunch in the exhibit hall. Thank you. Thanks.